The human dared to approach her. Xanth, the Jem'Hadar representative, couldn't believe her eyes as Stephen Russell, Earth's ambassador, strode confidently across the crowded reception hall of Nexus 7. The space station hummed with activity, diplomats from 100 worlds mingling in a cacophony of languages and scents. But for Xanth, everything faded into the background as the audacious human drew near. Stephen ignored the urgent whispers of his aides, their warnings about Jem'Hadar aggression falling on deaf ears. He fixed his gaze on Xanth, captivated by her otherworldly beauty. Her iridescent scales shimmer under the soft light of the reception hall, her eyes like twin nebulae swirling with unknown depths. The gathered diplomats fell silent, conversations halting mid-sentence as they watched the unfolding scene. The Jem'Hadar delegation tensed, hands instinctively moving towards concealed weapons. Captain Drack, head of Nexus 7 security, signaled his team to be ready. The air crackled with tension. Stephen stopped before Xanth, offering a disarming smile. "Ambassador Xanth, I'm Stephen Russell of Earth. It's an honor to meet you." Xanth's initial shock gave way to reluctant curiosity. She responded, her voice a melodic blend of tones no human vocal cords could produce. "Ambassador Russell, your boldness is unexpected." As they conversed, Stephen became acutely aware of the stakes at play. Humanity's petition to join the Galactic Council hung in the balance, their fate tied to the notoriously isolationist Jem'Hadar. And Xanth, he realized, held the pivotal vote. Unbeknownst to Stephen, Xanth harbored a secret fascination with human culture, particularly their mating rituals. She found them exotic, wildly different from the clinical Jem'Hadar practices. This curiosity warred with her race's strict cultural norms, forbidding fraternization with other species. Across the hall, Vortak, the Jem'Hadar High Commander, watched the interaction with narrowed eyes. He saw Stephen's approach as a potential threat to Jem'Hadar influence within the Galactic Council. His hand tightened on his ceremonial staff, knuckles white with tension. In the shadows, representatives of the Zorthal Confederacy whispered urgently. Earth's admission to the Council would upset the delicate balance of power, threatening their economic dominance. They plotted, seeking ways to sabotage humanity's chances. Stephen navigated the conversation carefully, aware that every word could tip the scales. He sought common ground with Xanth, drawing on his diplomatic training to bridge the vast cultural divide. Each moment brought new challenges. A misinterpreted gesture could spark outrage, while the right word might forge an alliance. The reception hall buzzed with speculation. Other diplomats watched the human Jem'Hadar interaction closely, recalculating their own positions and alliances. Trade negotiations, military pacts, and centuries-old agreements suddenly seemed in flux. As Stephen and Xanth continued their dialogue, neither fully grasped the far-reaching consequences of this moment. Their conversation, born of one human's daring approach to a gorgeous alien girl, was setting in motion events that would reshape the political landscape of the galaxy. The future of humanity among the stars hung in the balance, all because Stephen Russell dared to cross a crowded room. As the reception's formalities wound down, Stephen found himself unexpectedly paired with Xanth for a mandatory diplomatic tour of Nexus 7's advanced research facilities. The station's administration had arranged these tours to showcase their technological prowess, but for Stephen it presented an invaluable opportunity to engage Xanth in more private conversation. They stepped into a sleek, transparent elevator that offered panoramic views of the station's bustling central hub. As they ascended, Stephen noticed Xanth's eyes widening, her scaled skin shimmering with reflected light. "Impressive, isn't it?" Stephen said, gesturing to the view. "Humans may be newcomers to the galactic stage, but we've always had a knack for engineering marvels." Xanth nodded, her voice a melodic hum. "Your species' adaptability is intriguing. We Jem'Hadar value stability, unchanging traditions, yet you embrace change so readily." The elevator doors slid open, revealing a vast laboratory filled with holographic displays and humming machinery. Dr. Ilara Voss, the lead xenobiologist, greeted them with a warm smile. "Welcome to Nexus 7's Xenobiology Research Center," she said, leading them past workstations where scientists of various species collaborated. We're at the forefront of studying interspecies, compatibility, and adaptation. As they moved through the lab, Stephen noticed Xanth's gaze lingering on displays showcasing human physiology and social behaviors. Her curiosity was palpable, and he seized the opportunity to engage her further. "Is there anything specific you'd like to know about humans, Ambassador Xanth?" he asked, careful to keep his tone neutral and professional. Xanth hesitated, her iridescent eyes darting between Stephen and Dr. Voss. "Your mating practices," she said quietly. "They differ greatly from ours. How do humans choose partners?" Stephen felt a flutter of excitement at her question, recognizing the potential diplomatic breakthrough. He explained basic human dating customs, watching as Xanth absorbed the information with rapt attention. "Fascinating," Xanth murmured. "And physical compatibility between species? Is it possible?" Dr. Voss interjected, her scientific enthusiasm evident. "Actually, we've made significant strides in that area. Our latest research on cross-species genetic adaptation shows promising results." As Dr. Voss launched into a detailed explanation, Stephen noticed Xanth leaning in, her usual stoic demeanor replaced by genuine curiosity. He allowed himself a moment of hope. Perhaps this shared scientific interest could bridge the gap between their species. Unbeknownst to them, their conversation was being closely monitored. In the station's security hub, Captain Drac frowned as he listened to the audio feed. Beside him, Vortak, the Jem'Hadar High Commander, clenched his fists in almost unchecked rage. "This human dares to corrupt our ambassador with his foreign ideas," Vortak growled. He turned to his second-in-command, Krelvak. "Intervene immediately. Separate them by any means necessary." In another section of the station, Ambassador Zix of the Zorthal Confederacy huddled with his advisors. This unexpected connection between the human and Jem'Hadar could upset everything, Zix hissed. "We must act quickly." Back in the lab, Stephen and Xanth had moved on to a demonstration of Earth's latest holocommunication devices. As Stephen explained the technology's applications in long-distance relationships, Xanth's questions became more pointed. "And these devices, they allow mates to maintain intimacy across vast distances?" she asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and something Stephen couldn't quite identify. Longing, perhaps? Before Stephen could respond, the lab's doors hissed open. Krelvak strode in, flanked by a squad of heavily armed Jem'Hadar soldiers. The atmosphere in the room instantly shifted, tension crackling like static electricity. "Ambassador Xanth," Krelvak barked, "you will return to our delegation immediately. This interaction is over." Stephen stepped forward, hands raised in a placating gesture. "There's no need for hostility, Commander. We're simply touring the facility as part of the diplomatic program." Krelvak's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Silence, human. We are aware of your attempts to manipulate our ambassador. A formal complaint will be filed with the Galactic Council." The situation teetered on the brink of violence when Captain Drac's voice crackled over the station's comm system. "This is a direct order from station security. Ambassador Russell and Ambassador Xanth are to report to the medical bay immediately for a mandatory examination. All other personnel are to stand down." Confusion rippled through the room. Stephen locked eyes with Xanth, seeing his own uncertainty mirrored in her gaze. As they were escorted out by Drac's security team, Xanth subtly brushed her hand against Stephen's, a gesture so quick he almost missed it. In that fleeting touch, Stephen understood her silent message. Despite the growing opposition, Xanth wanted to continue their dialogue. It was a defiance of Jem'Hadar cultural norms that both thrilled and terrified him. As they walked towards the medical bay, Stephen's mind raced. The fate of humanity's petition to join the Galactic Council now seemed to hinge on the outcome of this unexpected medical examination. He knew that every word, every action in the coming hours would be scrutinized. Behind them, the Zorthal delegation moved swiftly through the station's corridors. Ambassador Zix clutched a datapad containing fabricated evidence of human pheromone technology. His target, Vortak, in the Jem'Hadar High Command. The doors of the medical bay loomed before them, promising either vindication or disaster. Stephen took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever challenges lay ahead. As he glanced at Xanth, he saw not just an alien diplomat, but a potential ally in the complex dance of interstellar politics. The medical bay doors slid open, revealing a team of multi-species doctors ready to begin their examination. Stephen and Xanth exchanged one last look before stepping inside, both acutely aware that the next few hours could reshape the future of human-alien relations forever. The medical bay doors slid shut behind Stephen and Xanth with a soft hiss, sealing them into a sterile environment of gleaming surfaces and advanced medical equipment. A team of doctors from various species stood ready, their diverse anatomies a testament to the station's commitment to interspecies cooperation. At the center of it all, a holographic interface flickered to life, revealing the pixelated face of Medica, the station's advanced medical AI. Its voice, a soothing blend of tones, filled the room. "Welcome, Ambassador Russell and Ambassador Xanth. I am Medica, Nexus 7's medical artificial intelligence. We will now commence a thorough examination to ensure the well-being of both parties and detect any signs of manipulation or coercion." As the examination began, Stephen noticed Xanth's growing discomfort. Her iridescent scales seemed to lose some of their luster, and her posture became rigid. He recalled his briefings on Jem'Hadar culture, realizing that the invasive nature of the medical procedures conflicted with their deeply held taboos about physical contact with other species. Stephen stepped forward, addressing the AI directly. "Medica, I have a request. Could you adjust your protocols to accommodate Jem'Hadar cultural sensitivities? Perhaps there are less invasive methods we could use?" Medica's holographic face flickered as it processed the request. "Analyzing adjustment possible, implementing alternative non-contact scanning procedures." Xanth's eyes widened, her gaze meeting Stephen's. You would do this for me?" she asked, her melodic voice tinged with surprise. Stephen offered a gentle smile. "Of course, respect for cultural differences is a cornerstone of human diplomacy." As the examination continued with the modified procedures, Stephen noticed a shift in Xanth's demeanor. Her posture relaxed, and the shimmer returned to her scales. He felt a flutter of hope. Perhaps this small gesture could be the first step towards greater understanding between their species. Dr. Alara Voss, monitoring the proceedings, suddenly leaned forward, her eyes fixed on a holographic display. "Medica, are you seeing this? These hormonal fluctuations in Ambassador Xanth's biochemistry?" Medica's voice chimed in. "Affirmative, Dr. Voss, detecting unusual endocrine activity in Jem'Hadar physiology, correlating with proximity to human subject." Stephen's heart raced as he processed the implications. He glanced at Xanth, who seemed equally perplexed by the revelation. Dr. Voss turned to them, her eyes alight with scientific curiosity. "This is fascinating. Ambassador Xanth, your body is exhibiting physiological responses typically associated with, well, attraction, and they seem to be triggered by Ambassador Russell's presence." Xanth's scales rippled with a cascade of colors, a physical manifestation of her conflicting emotions. "That's impossible," she stammered. "Jem'Hadar do not experience attraction to other species. It goes against everything we've been taught." Stephen, sensing Xanth's distress, intervened. "Dr. Voss, perhaps we could discuss the implications of this discovery privately. This seems like a sensitive matter." Dr. Voss nodded, ushering the other medical staff out of the room. As the doors closed behind them, leaving Stephen and Xanth alone with Medica's holographic presence, an alarm blared through the station. Captain Drax's voice crackled over the intercom, tension evident in his tone. "Attention, all personnel. The Jem'Hadar warship Karvosh has taken up an offensive position near the station. All non-essential personnel are to evacuate immediately. This is not a drill." Stephen's mind raced, the gravity of the situation crashing down upon him. He turned to Xanth, seeing his own concern mirrored in her alien features. "Xanth," he said, his voice low and urgent, "I know this is overwhelming, but we need to find a way to de-escalate this situation. Your people are on the brink of starting a war over a misunderstanding." Xanth's gaze met his, a mix of fear and willpower in her eyes. I don't know what to do. This goes against everything I've been taught, everything I've known." Stephen took a deep breath, weighing his next words carefully. Then perhaps it's time to learn something new. You asked about human mating practices earlier. What if I told you that at the core of our relationships is the idea of connection, of understanding and accepting each other, differences and all? Xanth's scales shimmered with interest. Tell me more, she said, her melodic voice barely above a whisper. As Stephen began to explain the intricacies of human dating and courtship, he was acutely aware of the ticking clock. Outside the medical bay, he knew chaos was erupting, species were evacuating, diplomats were scrambling, and warships were maneuvering. Yet here, in this quiet moment, he felt the weight of something profound, the potential for a breakthrough that could change the course of galactic history. You see, Stephen continued, his voice soft but intense, humans believe that love, true connection, can bridge any gap, overcome any obstacle. It's not just about physical compatibility, but about finding someone who challenges you, who makes you want to be better. Xanth listened, enraptured. Her questions became more pointed, more personal. And have you experienced this connection? Stephen's heart raced at the implication behind her words. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Medica's voice interrupted. Examination complete. No evidence of manipulation detected. However, hormonal analysis suggests a strong physiological response in Ambassador Xanth to Ambassador Russell's presence. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. Stephen and Xanth's eyes met, a moment of silent understanding passing between them. But before either could speak, the medical bay doors burst open. Captain Drax strode in, his face grim. Ambassadors, we have a situation. The Karvash has launched fighter craft. They're demanding Ambassador Xanth's immediate release and the expulsion of all humans from Nexus 7. Stephen's mind whirled, the weight of the galaxy's future pressing down on him. He looked at Xanth, seeing the conflict in her eyes, duty warring with newfound curiosity and connection. Captain, Stephen said, his voice steady despite the chaos, we need to buy some time. Is there any way we can open a direct channel to the Karvash? As Captain Drac moved to comply, Stephen turned back to Xanth. I know I'm asking a lot, he said softly, but I believe what's happening between us could be the key to preventing this war. Are you willing to take a chance on something new, something that could change everything? Xanth's scales shimmered with a rainbow of emotions as she considered his words. The fate of two species, and perhaps the entire galaxy, hung in the balance of her decision. The medical bay's sterile silence was shattered by the blaring of alarms, punctuated by Captain Drac's urgent voice over the intercom. Attention all personnel. Initiate emergency lockdown protocols. This is not a drill. All delegates are to return to their quarters immediately. Stephen and Xanth exchanged alarmed glances as the gravity of the situation sank in. Before either could speak, a squad of security drones burst into the medical bay, their metallic voices leaving no room for argument. Ambassadors Russell and Xanth, you are to be escorted to your respective quarters. Please comply immediately. As they were led out, Stephen caught a glimpse of Dr. Voss's face, her eyes wide with a mix of scientific curiosity and concern. The corridors of Nexus 7 were a flurry of activity, with delegates from various species being hurriedly ushered to their assigned areas. The drones deposited Stephen in his quarters with a final warning. Ambassador Russell, you are under station-wide house arrest. Attempts to leave will result in immediate detention. As the door slid shut, Stephen's mind raced. He paced the room, feeling the subtle vibrations as Nexus 7's energy shields activated, effectively sealing them off from the outside universe. The soft hum of the shields was a constant reminder of the precarious situation they now faced. Hours passed, filled with tense silence broken only by the occasional station-wide announcement. Stephen's attempts to access information were met with firewalls and security blocks. He was cut off, isolated, with no way to gauge the escalating crisis beyond the confines of his quarters. A chime from his personal communication device startled him. It was a message from Chief Diplomat Marcus Holloway, marked urgent. Stephen, we're in crisis mode. I've called an emergency session of the Galactic Council. proposing a human Jem'Hadar cultural exchange program. It's a long shot, but it might be our only chance to prevent war. Stay ready. We may need your expertise. Stephen's heart raced at the implications. A cultural exchange program? It was bold, potentially revolutionary. But would it be enough to quell the rising tensions? His thoughts were interrupted by another chime. This time, it was a secure channel authorization from Captain Drac himself. As the holographic interface flickered to life, Stephen found himself face-to-face with Xanth. Ambassador Russell, Xanth's melodic voice carried a note of urgency. I don't have much time. You need to know that I've been studying human culture for years. Your admission to the Galactic Council, my position as the deciding vote, it wasn't just political. I wanted to learn more about humans firsthand. Stephen's mind whirled with this revelation. Xanth, I don't know what to say, but why tell me this now? Because I believe we can find a solution, Xanth replied, her scales shimmering with drive. A way to satisfy both our species' interests. What if we propose a limited cultural exchange, focused specifically on studying mating practices? Before Stephen could respond, the station rocked violently. Alarms blared anew as Captain Drac's voice filled the air. Warning shot detected from the Karvash. All personnel, brace for potential impact. The holographic connection with Xanth flickered and died. In those frantic moments, Stephen made a decision. He quickly typed out a coded message to Xanth. Emergency meeting, Hydroponics Bay. Isos 200 hours. As the station's repair crews scrambled to assess the damage, Stephen began to formulate a plan. He examined every inch of his quarters, searching for a way out. The security measures were thorough, but not infallible. A maintenance hatch, hidden behind a panel near the floor, caught his attention. With careful precision, Stephen pried open the panel. The narrow passage beyond was dark and cramped, clearly not meant for human use, but it was his only chance. As he squeezed into the maintenance shaft, the weight of his mission pressed down on him. He was risking everything, his career, Earth's standing, perhaps even his life, on this clandestine meeting. But the alternative was unthinkable. If he and Xanth couldn't find a way to bridge the gap between their species, the Jem'Hadar human conflict could escalate into full-scale galactic war. Stephen crawled through the bowels of Nexus 7, the station's inner workings humming around him. He navigated the labyrinth of maintenance tunnels, relying on his memory of the station's layout to guide him towards the hydroponics bay. As he neared his destination, a wave of doubt washed over him. What if Xanth couldn't make it? What if this was all for nothing? But he pushed those thoughts aside. He had to believe in the connection they'd formed, in the potential for understanding between their species. Finally, he reached the access panel to the hydroponics bay. With a deep breath, Stephen prepared to emerge from hiding. Whatever happened next would shape the future of interstellar relations for generations to come. He placed his hand on the panel, ready to push it open and face whatever awaited him on the other side. Sighed. With a deep breath, he pushed it open and emerged into the lush greenery of the hydroponics bay. The air was thick with moisture and the scent of earth. Stephen blinked, adjusting to the bright artificial sunlight. As his eyes focused, he saw a familiar silhouette among the rows of alien vegetation. Xanth, he whispered, relief washing over him. The Jem'Hadar ambassador turned, her scales shimmering with a kaleidoscope of colors. Stephen, she replied, her voice a mix of relief and apprehension. I wasn't certain you'd make it. Before Stephen could respond, the station rocked violently. The plants swayed and loose soil spilled from the hydroponic beds. Alarms blared anew, echoing through the cavernous space. Warning shot detected from the Karvash, Captain Drac's voice boomed over the intercom. All personnel, brace for potential impact. Stephen stumbled, catching himself on a nearby planter. We need to move, he said urgently. This location's too exposed. Xanth nodded, her military training evident in her quick, precise movements. I know a place. Follow me. They slipped out of the hydroponics bay, Xanth leading the way through a series of lesser-used corridors. The station was in chaos, with delegates and staff rushing in all directions. Security drones buzzed overhead, their scanners sweeping the area. In here, Xanth hissed, pulling Stephen into an abandoned storage bay. As the door slid shut behind them, relative quiet descended. The alarms were muffled, and the frantic energy of the station felt distant. In the dim light, Stephen could see crates and defunct machinery scattered around the room. "We should be safe here for now," Xanth said, her eyes darting around the space. "Stephen, I need to understand." "Understand what?" Stephen asked, though he had a feeling he knew the answer. Xanth's scales rippled with a mix of curiosity and nervousness. Human mating rituals, the concept of romantic love. It's so alien to us, yet I find myself... She trailed off, unable to articulate the unfamiliar sensations coursing through her. Stephen took a deep breath, recognizing the weight of this moment. "It's complex," he began, choosing his words carefully. "Human relationships are built on emotional connections, not just biological imperatives." As Stephen explained the intricacies of human dating, courtship, and the formation of romantic bonds, Xanth listened with rapt attention. Her questions were pointed, sometimes uncomfortably personal, but Stephen answered as best he could. "And physical intimacy?" Xanth asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How does it differ from mere procreation?" Stephen felt heat rise to his cheeks. "It's about connection, pleasure, expressing affection, but it's always based on mutual consent and respect." As they talked, Stephen noticed Xanth's physiological reactions intensifying. Her scales shifted colors more rapidly, and her breathing quickened. He realized with a start that he was experiencing his own physical responses to their proximity and the intimate nature of their conversation. Unbeknownst to them, a malfunctioning maintenance drone in the corner of the room had activated. Its outdated processors, unable to distinguish between authorized and unauthorized activities, began broadcasting fragments of their conversation across random communication channels. In her lab, Dr. Alara Voss frowned at her console as snippets of dialogue filled her speakers. Her eyes widened as she recognized Stephen and Xanth's voices. "Medica, analyze this transmission. Cross-reference with our earlier findings on Jem'Hadar physiology." As the AI processed the data, Dr. Voss's excitement grew. The changes in Xanth's vocal patterns, combined with the content of the conversation, pointed to a remarkable conclusion. The Jem'Hadar's ability to form emotional bonds wasn't just a quirk of Xanth's biology, it was a dormant evolutionary trait. Meanwhile, in the storage bay, Stephen and Xanth's conversation had taken a more personal turn. "In my culture," Xanth said softly, "mating is a clinical process, efficient, emotionless. But observing humans, I've felt longing for something more." Stephen's heart raced. The vulnerability in Xanth's admission stirred something in him. "Xanth, His words were cut short by the sudden blare of alarms. The storage bay door slid open with a hiss, revealing Captain Drac flanked by a squad of security drones. "Ambassadors," Drac's voice was tight with tension, "you're in violation of station-wide lockdown orders. I'm afraid you'll have to come with us." Stephen and Xanth exchanged a look of panic. In that moment, they both realized that their clandestine meeting had evolved into something far more significant, not just for them, but potentially for the future of human Jem'Hadar relations. As the security drones advanced, Stephen's mind raced. Surrender meant facing the consequences of their actions, but it might also provide a platform to share their breakthrough. Escape, on the other hand, could buy them time to formulate a plan, but at the cost of further escalating tensions. Xanth's scales shimmered with a mix of fear and persistence. She leaned close to Stephen, her voice barely audible over the alarms. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." Stephen took a deep breath, weighing their options as the security drones closed in. The fate of two species, and perhaps the entire galaxy, hung in the balance of his next move. Stephen's mind raced as he met Xanth's gaze. In that split second, a silent agreement passed between them. They couldn't surrender, not when they were on the cusp of a breakthrough. "Now," Stephen whispered urgently. Xanth's form shimmered, her scales shifting to match the metallic hues of the storage bay. She grabbed Stephen's arm, pulling him close as her camouflage ability extended to encompass them both. Captain Drax's eyes narrowed as the two ambassadors seemed to vanish before him. "Spread out!" he barked to his security drones. "They can't have gone far." Stephen held his breath as Xanth guided them through the confusion. Her movements were fluid and precise, weaving between the advancing drones with preternatural grace. They slipped through the open door and into the corridor beyond. Once clear of immediate danger, Xanth released her hold on Stephen, her scales returning to their normal, iridescent sheen. "We need to move quickly," she hissed. "My camouflage won't fool the station's sensors for long." Stephen nodded, his heart pounding. "I know a way through the maintenance shafts. Follow me." They raced through the labyrinthine corridors of Nexus 7, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. Stephen led them to a rarely used access panel, prying it open with trembling hands. As they crawled through the cramped maintenance shaft, alarms blared throughout the station. The metallic taste of recycled air filled Stephen's mouth as he navigated the narrow passages, Xanth close behind. "Stephen," Xanth whispered, her voice tinged with curiosity even in their dire situation. "Earlier, when we were talking about human mating practices, I felt something, a sensation I've never experienced before." Stephen paused, turning to face her in the dim light of the maintenance shaft. "Xanth, A figure suddenly appeared at a junction ahead, causing both of them to freeze. Stephen's hand instinctively reached for a weapon he didn't have. "Wait," the figure raised her hands. "I'm Dr. Alara Voss. I've been looking for you both." Stephen recognized the scientist from earlier briefings. "Dr. Voss, what are you doing here?" "There's no time to explain fully," Dr. Voss said, her eyes darting nervously. "But I've made a groundbreaking discovery about gem hatter physiology. It's directly related to your interactions." Xanth's scales rippled with interest. "What do you mean?" "The ability to form emotional bonds isn't just unique to you, Xanth," Dr. Voss explained hurriedly. "It's a dormant evolutionary trait in all gem hadar. Your conversations, your proximity to Stephen, it's awakening something within you." The revelation hit Stephen like a shockwave. He turned to Xanth, seeing the confusion and wonder in her eyes. "This could change everything," he breathed. A distant explosion rocked the station, reminding them of the precarious situation outside. "We need to get this information out," Stephen said, his mind racing. "If we can broadcast it to all delegates." "The central computer core," Dr. Voss suggested. "It's our best chance to reach everyone simultaneously." They moved through the maintenance shafts with renewed purpose, emerging into a seldom-used corridor. As they ran, Stephen's mind whirled with the implications of Dr. Voss's discovery. Could this be the key to preventing war? Suddenly, the lights flickered, and a surge of energy pulsed through the station. Stephen stumbled, catching himself against a wall. "What was that?" Dr. Voss's face paled. "The Aegis protocol. It's been activated." "The what?" Xanth asked, her military training evident in her alert stance. "An experimental defense system," Dr. Voss explained as they continued moving. "AI-driven, designed to neutralize all threats. But if it's active, it'll see us as a threat," Stephen finished grimly. As if on cue, a security drone rounded the corner ahead, its sensors locking onto them. Unlike the standard models, this drone's movements were more fluid, more intelligent. The Aegis protocol had upgraded it. Xanth reacted instantly, her Gem Hadar combat training kicking in. She launched herself at the drone, her scales hardening into a natural armor. With a series of precise strikes, she disabled the machine, but not before it let out a shrill alarm. "Run!" Stephen shouted, grabbing Dr. Voss's arm. They sprinted through the corridors, the sounds of pursuing drones growing louder behind them. The station shuddered again, more violently this time. Stephen knew the Karvosh must be intensifying their attack. As they ran, Xanth fell into step beside Stephen. "Earlier, you were going to say something," she said, her voice steady despite their pace, "about human mating practices." Stephen almost laughed at the absurdity of discussing this while fleeing for their lives, but he recognized the importance of the moment. "Xanth, what we have, it's more than just cultural exchange. I think I'm developing feelings for you." Xanth's scales flushed with a vibrant blue. I think I am too." These sensations, they're overwhelming, but not unpleasant. Their eyes met, a moment of connection amidst the chaos. Dr. Voss, running ahead of them, called back, "The computer core is just ahead. We're almost there." They rounded a corner and found themselves facing the imposing security doors of the central computer core. Dr. Voss rushed to the control panel, her fingers flying over the interface. "It's locked down," she said, frustration evident in her voice. "The Aegis protocol has changed all the access codes." Stephen joined her at the panel, his diplomatic training kicking in. "Maybe I can override it with my ambassador credentials." As Stephen worked on the panel, Xanth stood guard, her senses on high alert. The station shook again, more violently this time. Warning lights flashed along the corridor. "Structural integrity failing in sectors 7 through 12, an automated voice announced. "All personnel evacuate immediately." Stephen's fingers moved faster, sweat beading on his forehead. Come on," he muttered. Suddenly, the sound of multiple drones approaching echoed from both ends of the corridor. Xanth tensed, ready for combat. "Whatever you're going to do it fast," she warned. The security panel beeped, the screen flashing green. "I'm in," Stephen exclaimed. The massive doors began to slide open, revealing the heart of Nexus 7's computer systems. As they rushed inside, Stephen caught a glimpse of the advancing drones, their weapons primed. The doors slid shut behind them just as the first energy blast struck, leaving scorch marks on the reinforced metal. Inside the computer core, banks of servers hummed with activity, holographic displays floating in the air. Dr. Voss immediately moved to the central console. "We need to broadcast on all channels, to every part of the station and to the ships outside." As she worked, Stephen turned to Xanth. The Jem'Hadar ambassador's scales were shifting through a rainbow of colors, her body reacting to the intense emotions of the moment. "Xanth," Stephen said softly, taking her hand. "Whatever happens next, I want you to know." A massive explosion rocked the station, cutting off Stephen's words. Alarms blared with renewed intensity. "Warning, critical system failure," the station's AI announced. "Initiating emergency protocols." Dr. Voss looked up from the console, her face a mask of purpose. "It's ready. Once I hit this button, our message will go out to everyone. But the Aegis protocol is fighting me. We might only have seconds before it shuts us down." Stephen nodded, his hand still clasped with Xanth's. "Do it." As Dr. Voss's finger descended towards the broadcast button, Stephen and Xanth shared a look of hope and fear. Whatever happened next would change the course of human-Jem'Hadar relations forever. The fate of two species, and perhaps the entire galaxy, hung in the balance of this moment. Dr. Voss's finger descended towards the broadcast button. In that instant, the computer core's doors exploded inward, showering the room with debris. Stephen instinctively pulled Xanth close, shielding her from the blast. Through the smoke, the imposing silhouette of a heavily fortified security checkpoint materialized. Red laser grids crisscrossed the entrance, backed by auto turrets primed to fire. "The Aegis protocol," Dr. Voss gasped, her hand frozen above the console. "It's adapted faster than I anticipated." Stephen's mind raced. "We need a new plan. Fast." Xanth's scales rippled with commitment. "I can use my camouflage abilities to slip through the laser grid. If I can reach the other side, I might be able to deactivate it." "Too risky," Stephen countered. "Those auto turrets will shred you the moment you materialize." Dr. Voss interjected. "What if we combined our strengths? Stephen, your diplomatic credentials might still have some sway in the system. Xanth, your Jem'Hadar physiology could be the key to bypassing the biometric scanners. And I can use my scientific expertise to exploit any vulnerabilities in the checkpoint's code." They worked in tandem, Stephen's fingers flying over the diplomatic override panel, while Xanth pressed her palm against the biometric scanner. Dr. Voss furiously typed lines of code into her datapad, probing for weaknesses. A high-pitched whine filled the air. Stephen looked up to see a swarm of advanced security drones pouring through the shattered doorway, their stun weapons humming with energy. "We're out of time," Dr. Voss shouted. "You two, go. I'll hold them off and buy you some time." "But," Stephen began to protest. "Go!" Dr. Voss insisted, grabbing a fallen piece of debris and wielding it like a club. The fate of our species depends on you reaching that core. With a final nod of gratitude, Stephen and Xanth sprinted towards the checkpoint. The laser grid flickered and died just as they reached it, allowing them to slip through. Behind them, they heard the crackle of stun weapons and Dr. Voss's defiant shouts. As they raced down the corridor towards the inner sanctum of the computer core, the station shuddered violently. Emergency lights flashed, bathing the hallway in an eerie red glow. "What was that?" Xanth asked, her voice tight with concern. Before Stephen could respond, Captain Drax's voice boomed over the station-wide comm system. "Attention, all personnel. A Jem'Hadar boarding party has been granted limited access to negotiate. All non-essential staff are to remain in their designated safe zones." Stephen's blood ran cold. "Vortak," he whispered. "He's here." They reached the computer core's main access terminal. Stephen's hands trembled as he input his credentials, praying they hadn't been revoked. Suddenly, Xanth doubled over, her scales flashing a brilliant array of colors. "Stephen," she gasped, her voice strained. "Something's happening to me. These sensations, they're overwhelming." Stephen caught her as she stumbled, supporting her weight. Their faces were inches apart and he could feel the heat radiating from her scales. "Xanth, what is it?" Her eyes locked onto his, filled with a mixture of confusion and longing. I think I'm experiencing what humans call desire. Stephen, I want to learn about human mating practices. With you." The air between them crackled with tension. Stephen's heart raced, torn between his growing feelings for Xanth and the urgency of their mission. "Xanth, The computer core's doors hissed open, cutting off Stephen's response. They whirled to face the entrance, Xanth instinctively moving to protect Stephen. Vortak strode in, flanked by heavily armed Jem'Hadar soldiers. His eyes narrowed as he took in the scene before him. "Xanth," he growled, "you disgrace your people by consorting with this human." "You're wrong, Vortak," Xanth replied, her voice steady despite her recent physiological turmoil. "There's so much we don't understand about ourselves, about our potential." Vortak raised his weapon, aiming it squarely at Stephen. "Step away from the human, Xanth. Now!" The tense standoff was suddenly interrupted by the arrival of Krelvac and Chief Diplomat Holloway. "Stand down, Vortak!" Krelvac shouted, positioning himself between the opposing groups. Vortak's eyes widened in shock. "Traitor! I ordered your arrest!" "And I chose to listen to reason instead," Krelvac retorted. He turned to address the other Jem'Hadar soldiers. "Brothers, we stand at a crossroads. For too long, we have been bound by outdated notions of our nature. But there is another path, one of cooperation and growth." The Jem'Hadar soldiers shifted uneasily, some lowering their weapons as doubt crept into their expressions. Seizing the moment of distraction, Stephen lunged for the computer core's main console. His fingers flew across the keys, initiating the broadcast of Dr. Voss's findings. "People of Nexus 7, delegates of all species," Stephen's voice rang out across the station and to the ships beyond. "We stand on the brink of a remarkable discovery. The Jem'Hadar are not the unfeeling warriors we believed them to be. They possess the capacity for emotion, for connection, for love." As Stephen's words echoed through the station, the computer core shook violently. Warning klaxons blared to life. "Alert! Zorthal warship detected," the station's AI announced. "Shields failing in sectors 3 through 7. Multiple hull breaches detected." Captain Drax's voice cut through the chaos. "All hands, battle stations, redirect all available power to shields." In the computer core, the assembled group stared at each other, the gravity of the situation sinking in. They were no longer just fighting for understanding between their species. They were fighting for survival itself. Xanth stepped forward, her scales shimmering with drive. "We must stand together," she declared, looking from Stephen to Vortak to Krelvac. "Human, Jem'Hadar. Our fates are intertwined now." As if in response to her words, another violent tremor rocked the station. Sparks showered from damaged consoles, and the lights flickered ominously. Stephen met Xanth's gaze, seeing his own tenacity reflected in her eyes. Whatever came next, They would face it together, not as separate species, but as allies united against a common threat. The future of their peoples, and perhaps the entire galaxy, hung in the balance of their next move. The computer core's speakers crackled to life, broadcasting Stephen's impassioned words across Nexus 7 and beyond. As his voice echoed through the station's corridors and reached the surrounding ships, an eerie stillness descended upon the chaos. Vortak's weapon wavered, his eyes darting between Stephen and Xanth. The Jem'Hadar soldiers behind him shifted uneasily, their previously unshakable dedication visibly crumbling. In that moment of uncertainty, the station shuddered violently. A deafening boom reverberated through the structure, followed by the screech of tearing metal. "Alert! Zorthal warship detected," the AI's dispassionate voice announced. "Shields failing in sectors 3 through 7, multiple hull breaches detected." Captain Drax's voice cut through the tension. "All hands, battle stations, redirect all available power to shields." The gravity of the situation hit Stephen like a physical blow. They weren't just fighting for understanding between their species anymore. They were fighting for survival itself. Xanth stepped forward, her scales shimmering with a newfound intensity. "We must stand together," she declared, her gaze sweeping across the assembled group. "Human Jem'Hadar, our fates are intertwined now." Another violent tremor rocked the station, showering them with sparks from damaged consoles. The lights flickered ominously, plunging the computer core into intermittent darkness. In the chaos that followed, Stephen and Xanth found themselves pushed back against a bank of servers. Vortak's loyalists clashed with Krelvak's supporters, their enhanced strength and speed turning the computer core into a battleground. "We need to get to the main control terminal," Stephen shouted over the din, ducking as a piece of debris sailed over his head. Xanth nodded, her eyes scanning the room for a path through the melee. "There," she pointed, indicating a narrow gap between two groups of fighting Jem'Hadar. They moved as one, Stephen's diplomatic agility complementing Xanth's warrior reflexes. They wove through the conflict, narrowly avoiding stray blows and flying equipment. Just as they reached the terminal, a shimmering barrier materialized in front of them. Stephen's hand passed through it, only to be met with a painful jolt of energy. "The Aegis Protocol," he hissed, shaking his numbed fingers. "It's adapting, trying to lock us out." Xanth's scales rippled with frustration. "Can you override it?" Stephen's fingers flew over the keypad, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm trying, but it's like nothing I've ever seen before. The system's evolving faster than I can keep up." A sudden commotion near the entrance caught their attention. A group of unfamiliar aliens burst into the computer core, led by a figure Stephen recognized with a sinking feeling, Ambassador Zix. "Zorthal operatives," Xanth growled, her body tensing for combat. Stephen watched in horror as the Zorthal team began planting devices on critical infrastructure nodes. "They're going to destroy the station," he realized aloud. The holographic barrier in front of them flickered, momentarily destabilized by the ongoing Jem'Hadar conflict. Stephen seized the opportunity, lunging forward to access the terminal. "Xanth, cover me!" he called out, his fingers racing across the interface. Xanth positioned herself between Stephen and the chaos, her enhanced senses on high alert. "What are you doing?" "Something crazy," Stephen muttered, his eyes never leaving the screen. "Xanth, remember when we talked about human mating rituals?" Despite the dire situation, Xanth's scales flushed with a mix of curiosity and excitement. "Yes, but what does that have to do with—" Stephen cut her off, a determined glint in his eye. "I'm going to show you. Right now." Before Xanth could respond, Stephen stepped back from the terminal and began an elaborate series of movements. His arms swept in wide arcs, his body swaying in a rhythmic pattern that seemed completely at odds with their perilous situation. The effect was immediate and startling. The fighting Jem'Hadar froze mid-combat, their attention captured by Stephen's unexpected display. Even Vortak and Krelvak paused their heated argument, staring in bewilderment. Xanth found herself transfixed, her scales shifting through a kaleidoscope of colors. "Stephen," she breathed, "what is this?" A human mating display? Stephen explained between movements, his voice slightly strained from exertion. In times of stress, humans sometimes use courtship rituals to form deeper bonds. As Stephen continued his performance, the Aegis Protocol's defenses began to falter. The holographic barriers flickered and disappeared, the AI's threat assessment algorithms apparently unable to categorize this new behavior. Seizing the moment, Stephen grabbed Xanth's hand and pulled her towards the terminal. Quick, while it's distracted! Together, they accessed the station's core systems. Stephen's understanding of human technology merged seamlessly with Xanth's Jem'Hadar intuition as they worked to override the Aegis Protocol. This is incredible, Xanth marveled, her fingers dancing across the interface. I've never felt so connected to another being before. Stephen smiled despite the gravity of their situation. That's what human relationships are all about, Xanth. Trust, teamwork, supporting each other. As they worked, the station's systems began to respond. Slowly but surely, control was wrested away from the Aegis Protocol. But their victory was short-lived. A violent explosion rocked the computer core, sending everyone stumbling. Through the smoke, Stephen saw Ambassador Zix and his team making their escape, leaving behind a trail of activated explosive devices. Alarms blared with renewed intensity. The station's AI spoke, its voice distorted and fragmented. Critical, system, failure, initiating, emergency, proto. The message cut off abruptly, leaving an ominous silence in its wake. Stephen and Xanth shared a look of grit tinged with fear. They had regained control of Nexus 7, but at what cost? And with the Zorthal threat still looming, would it be enough to save the station and its inhabitants? As if in answer to their unspoken questions, the computer core's main screen flickered to life. Captain Drax's face appeared, his expression grim. Stephen, Xanth, if you can hear me, we need you in the command center immediately. The situation has just gotten a whole lot worse. Stephen nodded, his mind focused with drive. He turned to Xanth, extending his hand. Together? Xanth's scales shimmered with a mix of emotions as she grasped his hand firmly. Together. As they raced out of the computer core, leaving behind the stunned Jem'Hadar factions, Stephen couldn't help but wonder what new challenges awaited them. The fate of Nexus 7, the human petition to join the Galactic Council, and the future of human Jem'Hadar relations all hung in the balance. And with every step, the countdown to potential disaster ticked ever closer. As Stephen and Xanth raced towards the command center, the station shuddered beneath their feet. The explosions set by the Zorthal saboteurs were taking their toll on Nexus 7's infrastructure. We need to get back to the computer core, Stephen said, skidding to a halt and changing direction. It's our best chance to regain control of the station's systems. Xanth nodded, her scales rippling with a mix of anticipation and concern. They retraced their steps, dodging falling debris and sparking conduits. As they approached the computer core, they found the entrance partially blocked by collapsed ceiling panels. Stand back, Xanth said, her enhanced strength allowing her to clear a path through the wreckage. Inside, the core was a mess of flickering displays and damaged equipment. Stephen immediately set to work on the main terminal, his fingers flying across the interface as he fought to override the Aegis Protocol. Xanth positioned herself at his side, her keen Jem'Hadar senses alert for any threats. What can I do to assist? She asked. Stephen glanced up, an idea forming. Your Jem'Hadar intuition. It might be the key to breaking through these security measures. Can you interface with the system alongside me? As Xanth reached for the terminal, a violent tremor shook the room. A section of ceiling collapsed, separating them. Stephen found himself trapped behind a wall of debris, the main terminal just out of reach. Xanth, he called out, coughing through the dust. Are you all right? I'm unharmed, she responded, her voice muffled by the barrier between them. But we need to find a way to reunite quickly. Stephen scanned his surroundings, his mind racing. There's a maintenance shaft above us. If I can reach it, I might be able to get around this debris. Using his diplomatic agility, Stephen clambered up a damaged server rack, his fingers finding purchase on exposed support beams. With a final push, he hauled himself into the narrow shaft. Meanwhile, Xanth used her Jem'Hadar strength to clear a path through the fallen debris. As she worked, Dr. Voss burst into the room, clutching a vial of luminescent liquid. "Xanth!" Dr. Voss called out, her voice urgent. "I've completed the compound to stabilize your emotional responses. We need to administer it now." Xanth hesitated, her scales shifting colors rapidly. "But Stephen is on his way," Dr. Voss assured her. "This will help you work more effectively together." With a nod, Xanth allowed Dr. Voss to administer the compound. The effect was immediate. A wave of clarity washed over her, her turbulent emotions settling into a steady, focused state. As the compound took effect, Stephen emerged from the maintenance shaft, dropping down beside them. He took in the scene, noting the change in the Xanth's demeanor. "How do you feel?" he asked, moving towards the terminal. Xanth joined him, her movements fluid and precise. Clearer, more focused. "I think I understand now. About human cooperation. About us." Together, they interfaced with the system, their combined efforts making rapid progress against the Aegis Protocol's defenses. Stephen's innovative approach complemented Xanth's intuitive understanding of the system's architecture. As they worked, Captain Drax's voice came over the comm system. "Stephen, Xanth, I'm diverting additional power to the computer core. It'll weaken our other systems temporarily, but it should give you the boost you need." The terminal surged with energy, and Stephen and Xanth redoubled their efforts. Lines of code flashed across the screen as they navigated through layers of security protocols. Suddenly, the sound of weapons fire echoed from the corridor outside. Krelvak's voice carried over the din. "Hold the line! We cannot let Vortax forces reach the core." Dr. Voss moved to secure the entrance, her eyes darting between the battle outside and the pair working at the terminal. "How much longer?" she asked. "Almost there," Stephen replied, his brow furrowed in concentration. With a final burst of effort, Stephen and Xanth broke through the last of the Aegis Protocol's defenses. The main screen flickered, then stabilized, displaying full access to Nexus 7's systems. "We did it," Xanth breathed, her scales shimmering with a mix of relief and excitement. Stephen nodded, already moving to target the Zorthal warship. "Xanth, I need you to stabilize our shield matrix while I coordinate our counterattack." As Xanth worked on reinforcing the station's defenses, Stephen directed a series of precise strikes against the Zorthal vessel. Caught off guard by the sudden assault, the warship sustained heavy damage and was forced to retreat. With the immediate external threat neutralized, they turned their attention to Nexus 7's internal systems. Life support was failing in several sectors, and structural integrity was compromised in others. "We need to reroute power to the affected areas," Stephen said, his fingers dancing across the interface. Xanth nodded, her enhanced understanding allowing her to anticipate Stephen's needs. "I'll stabilize the atmospheric regulators while you handle the structural integrity fields." As they worked in tandem, Xanth found herself marveling at the efficiency of their cooperation. "Is this what human mating practices are truly about?" she asked. "This level of synchronicity and mutual support?" Stephen glanced at her, a small smile playing at his lips, despite the gravity of their situation. "In a way, yes. It's about trust, understanding, and working together towards a common goal." Dr. Voss, observing their interaction, made notes on her datapad. "Fascinating," she murmured. "The compound seems to be enhancing their emotional connection, creating a form of empathy that transcends species barriers." As news of Stephen and Xanth's successful collaboration spread throughout the station, the sounds of conflict began to die down. The various factions, inspired by this demonstration of human Jem'Hadar cooperation, started to lay down their arms. Chief Diplomat Holloway's voice came over the comm system. "Stephen, Xanth, your actions have given us a chance to salvage this situation. I'm reconvening the Galactic Council. We need to strike while the iron is hot." Stephen and Xanth shared a look of understanding. Their work was nowhere near the end, but they had opened a door to new possibilities, for Nexus 7, for human Jem'Hadar relations, and for the future of interspecies cooperation throughout the galaxy. As they continued to work on stabilizing the station's systems, Both Stephen and Xanth knew that their experience had fundamentally altered their understanding of each other's species. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their unique partnership a beacon of hope in the vast expanse of space. As the immediate crisis subsided, Stephen and Xanth found themselves with a moment to breathe. The computer core hummed with renewed energy, its systems slowly but steadily returning to normal operation. They stood side by side, their hands still hovering over the terminal, basking in the glow of their shared accomplishment. Xanth turned to Stephen, her scales shimmering with a mix of curiosity and admiration. "Stephen," she began, her voice soft yet filled with intensity, "I find myself intrigued by human mating practices. Your earlier display was most effective in distracting our adversaries, but I sense there's more to it than that." Stephen met her gaze, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You're right, Xanth. What you saw earlier was just a small part of human courtship. There's so much more to explore." He gently took her hand in his, noting how her scales shifted color at his touch. Physical contact like this is often the first step in human relationships. It's a way of establishing trust and intimacy. Xanth marveled at the sensation, her fingers instinctively intertwining with Stephen's. "Fascinating," she breathed. "The compound Dr. Voss administered seems to have enhanced my ability to process these new experiences. I can feel the significance of this gesture on multiple levels." Stephen nodded, his expression warm. "That's excellent, Xanth. Understanding and empathy are crucial in any relationship, especially between different species." He led her away from the terminal, towards a large viewport that offered a breathtaking view of the star-studded expanse beyond Nexus 7. "Let me show you something else humans often do when they're getting to know each other romantically." As they stood before the cosmic panorama, Stephen began pointing out various constellations visible from Earth. "See that cluster of stars there? On Earth, we call that Orion. Ancient humans imagined it as a great hunter in the sky." Xanth listened intently, her eyes wide with wonder. "We have similar stories among the Jem'Hadar," she revealed, her voice taking on a lyrical quality Stephen had never heard before. "That formation you call Orion? To us, it represents Kravok, the first warrior. It's said that he watches over all Jem'Hadar, guiding us in battle and in peace." Stephen turned to her, captivated by this new side of Xanth. "I had no idea the Jem'Hadar had such poetic traditions. Please, tell me more." As they continued to share stories of their respective cultures' celestial mythologies, Dr. Voss observed from a discreet distance. She tapped notes into her datapad, her eyes gleaming with scientific excitement. "Remarkable," she murmured to herself. "The compound has facilitated an unprecedented level of emotional bonding. This could revolutionize interspecies relations." Meanwhile, in the Emergency Command Center, Chief Diplomat Holloway and Krelvac joined Captain Drac. They watched the interaction between Stephen and Xanth on the security feeds, their expressions a mix of awe and hope. "I never thought I'd see the day," Krelvac admitted, his gruff voice tinged with emotion. "A human and a Jem'Hadar finding common ground like this." Holloway nodded, already formulating plans. "We need to capitalize on this. I'm thinking a long-term cultural exchange program between humans and Jem'Hadar. What do you say, Captain?" Drax smiled, his antennae twitching with approval. "I say make it happen, Diplomat. And let's not stop there. We should invite representatives from other species to witness this firsthand." As word spread of the events on Nexus 7, ships began arriving from across the galaxy. Delegates from dozens of species filled the station's newly repaired assembly hall, eager to see for themselves the possibilities of interspecies cooperation. The Galactic Council reconvened in an historic session. After hours of impassioned debate and testimony, they reached a unanimous decision. Earth's petition for membership was accepted. Humanity had proven its worth as a force for peace and understanding in the galaxy. As the session concluded, Stephen and Xanth were invited to address the assembled delegates. They approached the podium hand in hand, their presence alone a powerful symbol of what could be achieved through openness and empathy. Stephen spoke first, his voice clear and strong. "Distinguished delegates, we stand before you today not just as representatives of our respective species, but as living proof that curiosity and understanding can bridge even the widest of cultural divides. Xanth followed, her words measured and heartfelt. Through my interactions with Stephen, I have come to appreciate the beauty and complexity of human mating practices. These customs, once alien to me, have opened my eyes to new ways of forming connections and building relationships. As they concluded their joint address, Stephen turned to Xanth, his heart racing. In front of the entire assembly, he took both her hands in his. "Xanth," he said, his voice filled with warmth and a hint of nervousness, "would you do me the honor of going on a first date with me?" Xanth's scales rippled with a rainbow of colors, her eyes shining with joy and understanding. "Yes, Stephen," she replied, her voice steady and sure. "I would be honored to participate in this human tradition with you." The assembly erupted in applause as Stephen and Xanth sealed their new relationship with a kiss, a human gesture that Xanth now understood and cherished deeply. As they embraced, cameras flashed and comms buzzed, carrying the image of their union to every corner of the galaxy. In the days that followed, Nexus 7 transformed into a hub of interspecies cultural exchange. Beings from across the galaxy flocked to the station, eager to learn from the example set by Stephen and Xanth. The station buzzed with activity, its corridors filled with the sounds of a dozen different languages, as new friendships and partnerships blossomed. As the excitement on the station reached a fever pitch, Stephen and Xanth prepared for their first official date. They boarded a small observation vessel, leaving the bustling activity of Nexus 7 behind. As the ship glided away from the station, Stephen took Xanth's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Ready for an adventure?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with excitement. Xanth's scales shimmered with anticipation. "With you?" "Always," she replied, as they set course for a nearby nebula, ready to explore new wonders together.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.